I've been looking into and writing around like overarching part of Jung's work. This idea that you don't want to aim to be good, right? You want to aim to be whole, and that was his ethos, I guess, behind his theory of individuation, which is about like sort of becoming your authentic self and integrating all the parts of your psyche, not just those that you like, but those that you struggle with and don't want to look at, like the shadow, etc., etc. And this came to me through like a couple of quotes, one or two of which I'll probably use as I pose this to you. But I guess I'll ask firstly, do you have a rough? Have I talked about this before? This wholeness idea.
I think we spoke about it roughly about sort of integrating all the parts of you.
Mm, mm. So essentially, what I was writing was if you want to develop a certain aspect of your character, you actually have to confront and overcome and integrate like the opposite, or let's say your capacity for the opposite in yourself before you can develop that. Right. And let me put that in a couple of examples to make that make sense. If you want to be a courageous person, right, you also need to confront the part of you that is afraid and acknowledge that and overcome it and integrate it. You also have to face things that really stimulate that part of you that is afraid, right? Face your fear to develop courage. You can't really develop courage in any other way. If you want to be a virtuous person, you have to confront and overcome and integrate the part of yourself that is immoral, that has immoral thoughts, that has the capacity for immoral action. Right? We talked about this in many episodes ago. In that, a domestic cat that has no idea of morality can't really be nice because it doesn't really know that it's consciously choosing to be nice. It just is. I don't know. It's just kind of acting on instinct, right? We have moral or more clear moral choices as humans. So if you want to be virtuous, you have to sort of restrain that capacity for immorality and consciously choose the virtuous path. But you can't get the good thing without really addressing the more negative thing. Equally, and it's something you talked about, I believe, last week, if not the week before, about meaning. Well, for your life to mean something, it can't always be sunshine and rainbows and just going through the smooth motions with just ease and contentment and simplicity at every corner, right? That you need some kind of struggle, and I hesitate to use this word, but some kind of suffering, because obviously there are big extremes to that. But what I mean by that is to have meaning, you have to be challenged. So if you want your life to be meaningful, you want that fulfillment, you also have to confront the difficulty, the challenge of not living a meaningless life, like resisting the path of least struggle, I guess, like resisting the urge for comfort. And this is a kind of it's a paradoxical way of thinking about it, but it comes from that idea from Jung that to be whole, you have to confront the darkest parts of yourself, even your shadow. And there was this quote that I'll read to you now that kind of sprang these ideas in my head that he wrote. The ideal of spiritually striving for the heights was doomed to clash with the materialistic, earthbound passion to conquer matter and master the world. And that's the same dynamic, just with like ambition uh, and like spiritual exoneration, right? You can't really relinquish all your desires until you've integrated the parts of yourself that does desire. It's like Naval talking. I remember one of Naval's ideas once that like the easiest way to have no desires is to like achieve them all and realize they weren't what you wanted. It's like what are these? I don't want to say the easiest way to get rid of your desires is to renounce, not to renounce them, but to I don't know. I'm paraphrasing that badly, but anyway, there's something along those lines. But like confronting your insecure, ambitious self to then be free of that. You can't just resist it like and just push it all to the side because that's what Jung called repression, and that just means it will bubble up in some other form later down the line. So let me know if you have any thoughts, if you want me to clarify anything, because I understand that might have been a bit scrambly.
I like it. Is this from, did you actually start that Young book then? Is that the book that you got from Weatherspoons?
No, so uh this is from a quote that I read online, and I was actually looking into both my points today kind of merged together at different points, but I started on the like second point on the page that we have shared, and branching from that came this kind of line of thinking. And it started with I came across his quote again that I think you introduced to me ages ago, like back when we were going to a sauna, that Jung wrote, "No tree," it is said, can grow to heaven if if it's unless its roots reach down to hell or something like that. Like it needs to be reaching down to hell in order to grow to heaven. This idea that you need to address the dark to reach the light. We need darkness to experience light, and then it kind of sprang from that.
Mm. I think it reminds me of something that I recently read, that the amount of fulfillment you feel is directly correlated with the amount of resistance you overcome.
Oh,
It's walking the line of chaos and order over and over and
mm,
over again. And
mm,
I, I mean, you think about it, you ask yourself, how fulfilled am I? And this idea of fulfillment, it's kind of almost an emotion. It's like it is a way that you perceive the world. It's an intangible, but you can, if you think about how fulfilled are you, and then you'd ask yourself, well, the first thing that comes to mind is things that you've done to in order to be fulfilled, so the proof. So I think there is a lot of truth in that. And the other thing that it reminds me of when you say wholeness is this image that I've been very obsessed with, and I can't quite figure it out. But basically, you might have heard of something called the flower of life. It's this geometrical image. If you search it up on Google now,
yeah, yeah. No, got
yeah.
it.
So that to me is wholeness. Now, there's
Mm,
so many different interpretations of the flower of life. There's a lot of biblical interpretations, but one of the interpretations that I take is it's kind of the amalgamation of the feminine and the masculine, and how that kind of creates wholeness. Because you've got
mm,
kind of in the flower of life, you've got the structure and the orderliness of the male, the masculine, but you've also got the kind of curves and the sort of,
Beauty.
yeah, the beauty and the kind of weaving patterns inside this flower of the feminine. And that to me is, it really symbolizes wholeness, but there is a lot more interpretation. So there's people interpret it as a very sacred image. It's there's there's a lot of, like, people get technical and say that they link it to God creating the world in 7 days, and they link it to a kind of way of thinking about the universe. Like each circle in the flower of life is a aspect of your life, and they kind of all overlap together. And
Mm,
it also kind of fits this ideology that the universe is kind of like an organism, and we only maybe perceive like a part of the flower, but I think it's actually linked to. I feel like the flower of life was used in one of the Rapunzels. I think it was used in Disney's Tangled as this flower that would help the witch. That would help her, give her like eternal youth. And
yeah.
I think there's a lot of links to that in kind of how sort of modern movies and things use like Christian symbols. So I just thought I'd add that because that reminds me a lot of wholeness.
Mm. I mean, yeah, I really like that. Thank you. Because so I'll start with what you first said, that the fulfillment and overcome resistance relationship, I think is so true. And it's close to something I've been considering a lot in preparation for my talk next month about this like weird fact that we don't want our lives to be efficient. Like we want some obstacles. It would be boring if we like decided on something we wanted to do and then everything just instantly fell in place to do it. You don't want to win the lottery, so to speak, in terms of your circumstances in life. I remember like 3 years ago when I was at sick form, I had this thought that like if I woke up in the morning tomorrow and had everything I wanted, it wouldn't mean anything. Like we don't want just easy next step, next step process thinking and just moving toward the goal in a simple way. We want resistance because that's where the growth comes. That's where the meaning comes. That's when the fulfillment comes. So that's so, so true. And also, yeah, on this idea of wholeness, it's like you have so many psychic drives and so many parts of yourself that are like conscious or unconscious, and they all want kind of different things and have different narratives and philosophies. And if we're not careful, and if we're not mindful, and if we just sort of live our life on a kind of autopilot, I guess, we can be swayed here, there, and everywhere by the drives in our mind. And to me, wholeness means integrating each drive into like one 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 course, one self, one entity that then creates the way that you be in the world. You're not fragmented, right? You're whole as an individual. Your behavior then, and your personality then, and your experience of the world is conscious. You know, Jung also said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If you're scrambling here, there, and everywhere, and you don't realize that it might be an unconscious drive that's pulling you somewhere, then you'll feel like you don't have agency anymore, and it's all scrambled. And I know these are quite abstract concepts, but it really does make sense to me. And just like in the flower of life, you know, each individual segment on its own isn't very remarkable. When it all comes together in that pattern, you see the true image and the true shape. And maybe ourselves, our personalities are like that too.
Mm. I I take what you said about how we don't want to be good. We want to be whole instead. And I feel like some people listening are gonna maybe disagree with that, and because they've either had tragedies or they don't agree with the common idea that you need bad. But I think about the notion that you can't have a strong character and an easy life. And I think there's a big category of people that are going to choose the easy life, because I think that's quite a similar to what Young means. Um, but there is a reason why, with that kind of quote, I feel like there is a reason why the good character is better than the easy life. Although we might kind of fluctuate and debate between the two, in which we want at times. We are at that point of a lot of struggle, and we're thinking, "Fuck! Like I wish I wasn't here right now. I'd rather be at home." Or I think about the example of someone in the army who's like really going really at it, struggling, and they think about, oh, it'd be nice if I was cozy with my girlfriend in bed right now. Um,
Mm.
and I just think there's a lot of people watching that think that the easy life is a safer, more logical option for them. But I also think that the true answer is the strong character.
Well, I think you make a great points, Jake, and it's really important you push back on me with things like this and like make points of what you think people would interpret, or how you think people would interpret what we're talking about. Um, but I even wrote here when I was kind of going through this, we don't want our lives to be just good, because good is like you know, well, the idea I put here was like, imagine it's kind of a common, I don't know, collective daydream we have of like retirement and like sipping cocktails on a beach. And I remember Rogan and Peterson talking about it on a podcast and really breaking it down and going, okay, if you got to that point, well, how long are you going to be on the beach for? How many cocktails are you going to drink? Because ultimately it ends up with you like being really pissed and sunburned and bored. Or how many days are you going to do that in a row? 5, 20, a year? You're going to do that? I mean, you're just going to get fat and unhealthy and feel like shit. Like that dream isn't real. Instead, you want like your life to be better than good. And I think whole is better than good. You don't want, and that's why I say I hesitate on using the word suffering, because you don't want the extremes, of course, and suffering that's inflicted upon you involuntarily. That's terrible. That's why I guess I prefer the word challenge or struggle in terms of like voluntarily picking something that will test you and pull you. That's what will lead to the better outcome here. You want your life to be to have stories to tell, and the positive emotion you get to be meaning and more and mean more, I guess, than just like momentary ease and like pleasure. Like your example about the guy in the army is good, right? Because if he was like drafted involuntarily to go and basically put his life on the line, and he had no choice in that matter, he had no agency in the situation, I can see how that could be terrible. But if it's somebody who, I don't know, his dad was in the army and he always wanted to go into that world and he really picked this path for himself and this felt like his hero's journey and he felt like he was being tested in the right ways, then it could be really blissful and make him more whole and integrate all the parts of himself. It's just so nuanced, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah, and if people are maybe insufficient in wholeness, uh, then I believe then the idea is to take on something a little bit challenging and become more whole. I guess gets more because it's like something that's challenging is like a good kind of bad. It's a good kind of bad that you want. So that I
Well,
think is the solution.
and to put it in practical terms, it's not like you have to go around looking to like do hard things for no reason, just like David Gogginsify your life and start getting up at 4 a.m. and doing thousands of push-ups. No, no, no. Like, I feel like picking something to try and master in the world will will evolve into that source of meaning, right? And I always come back to it, I know, but it's just so relevant to me. Is like basketball, pursuing that and taking that seriously has stretched me in a very effective way. Like physically, yes, like a percentage of the training is really physically fatiguing, which makes me grow physically in terms of my like cardiovascular capacity and like muscles and stuff. But it's also socially stretched me because I have to play in a team with people and I have to manage different personalities and manage the way that I orient my behavior around other people. So we work towards our individual and collective goals. But it also there's a big sports psychology element to it. It stretches me mentally. So it's sometimes it's as simple as like if you're listening to this and you want to do something with your life, pick something that pulls you, that interests you to master. That could be writing, that could be building something and creating, that could be painting, that could be music, that could be, you really love films. Why don't you study films and try and make your own like short film or I don't know, you might like cooking and you want to master some sort of craft. Basically, trying to get good at anything and you going through those stages of mastery, obstacles will come in front of you that will force you to grow anyway. And that's what I mean by good. Like, you'll have to use every different part of yourself to truly master something in the world. So it doesn't just have to be the extreme versions of struggling and suffering that we can like come up with, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah, very good point. I'm going to pivot to an idea that I've been thinking about a lot. So it stemmed from about I posted a clip about when you were talking about is your anxiety the same as my anxiety? And there was a comment that said
Mm.
this is basically Wittgenstein's Beetle problem. And so I searched up, what is that? And essentially, it's this idea that if me and you had a box, and inside the box is a beetle, but I can't see your box and you can't see mine, and like, is then your beetle the same as my beetle? Um, Now people kind of use the language, and we actually name something a beetle. But since we can't check each other's box, it doesn't matter if your beetle is different to my beetle, um, or even if the box is empty, according to Wittgenstein. The word beetle gets its meaning from the physical creature, but it's really about how we develop um, language, this shared thing of language to basically summarize an experience. So
Mm.
if what if then we replace Beetle with saying, well, if if me and you are both cold, we're cold outside, then is my cold the same as your cold? Or if me and my sister are out and she says it's cold, well, my cold and her cold are definitely very different things. And then you can take that to more examples of, well, are my emotions and sensations the same as yours? Um, but it doesn't really stop there. And then you can really take this and define all things. Like, I thought about the question of what is a woman, and it's like, is my woman the same as your woman? Um, and then
mm,
we go back to what we were saying of with Zach of, is my red the same as your red? So essentially, we've agreed to create this world that summarizes an experience. But because our perceptions are different, we are not actually talking about the same thing a lot of the time.
mm,
And then I go, well, is there ever a time we're talking about the same thing? And I say, well, yes. If me and you were to drink from the same orange juice glass and we both took a sip, then my orange juice is the same as your orange juice. So the meaning kind of comes from this shared experience, this shared experience of life. And rather than the kind of the public, um, rather than the use of how it's used in public language, because we really don't get the whole kind of picture of what that thing is. And
mm,
shared practices then are what is what gives the word life. And I mean, and you think about it, and it's like, okay, that's what gives someone's words value. That's what gives what I say. That's when you listen. Because if I'm a good salesman and I tell you I'm a good salesman, you might kind of believe me if you know me. But if 5 people say that I'm a good salesman, um, like then you're going to believe me way, way, way more. We want that social proof, and that's why we've spoke about being why most important thing for a public speaker is is that is a public speaker needs to have weight behind their words. They need to have the proof behind what they're saying. So
mm,
I then took this and I was like, I thought about the scene in 1984 where it's my favorite scene when reading the book. The guy said, there's one of these sort of government guys who's one of the ones that are controlling people, and he says, "Ah, a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. What justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other word? Take good for example. What need is there for a word like bad? Ungood would do just well. If you want a stranger word,
mm,
if you want a stronger word for good, use plus good or double good. In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness would be covered by only 6 words." So
mm,
that's the kind of tyrannical thing behind how we use experience and language. Because if there's 2 people that experience love, but there's no word for love, then how can we summarize it and help others achieve it? It's an unknown thing. It's this what that woman from North Korea was saying on Rogan, about how there's no word for love in North Korea. And so
mm,
I then think about, I then take this into more like a practical sense. And if there's, say, if I'm in a cafe and I think there's maybe a girl that likes me, but I never go. No, let me take that back. If I'm in a cafe and a girl likes me, but I don't go up to talking her. I don't see it. I don't perceive it, and I don't know about it. Does her liking me exist? Well, you'd go, it doesn't exist for me, but it might do for her. So does it need to be mutually perceived to exist? And then you might say, well, no, because unconsciously, if she was to like me, then her behavior is going to change and it's going to be different with her body language. Maybe she's going to look at me a bit more than if she didn't like me. But then what if I don't interpret that? And then
mm,
and then you might say, well, it's still having an effect on you, even if you don't interpret it. But then I'd say, well, okay. let's say you're driving and you get a speeding fine, um, but the post it comes through the door, but you never open it. Well, does that exist if you don't interpret it? And I'd say, well, yes, because the longer that you don't interpret it, that the more the debt builds up, and the more it manifests itself. And well, maybe you ignore it for 3 months, and then eventually one day you can't swipe your cards. So yes, maybe it does, and this is why Berkeley was wrong. So Berkeley's the philosopher that said if there's if a tree falls in a forest and no one perceives it does exist, and he thought no, there needs to be a perceiver, and that's why he was wrong. Um, because he believed that physical objects don't exist independently without a perception of them.
From mm.
And this is why, unfortunately, I was wrong about how Africa might not exist, because um, like there's people perceiving it. I go to a shop and I'm eating mango that came from Africa, so it has to exist, right? But I remember with that example, I was talking to a girl in uni, and she was like, "Well, why did you say that in a clip? That's a bit stupid. Um, why did you say Africa don't exist?" And then I was like to her, "Well, it depends what you mean by exist." And I was like, "My definition of real is significant. So if 30 seconds ago this ball of air didn't exist, um, like, so 30 seconds ago this little ball of air didn't exist because you weren't thinking about it. It's only existing now because I've made it, I've manifested it. Um, you weren't thinking about it 30 seconds ago." And then she was like, then I was like, well, I had to kind of, she was like, "Why didn't you say that in the video?" And I was like, well, you know, that doesn't get 350,000 views, with all that context. But okay, let's say I've never, so Africa exists because I've had mango and that comes from Africa, so it must do. It's been perceived somewhere. But what if I've never had mango? And Africa then isn't significant. It hasn't manifested itself in my life. So if you're like one of those people in the Amish community in America that live with no technology, and the Amish is basically a community that lives with no technology, and they reject kind of like modern healthcare and things like that. Well, there's no way that Africa exists for them. So, in order for existence, there has to be knowledge. And now we get to the more usefulness of this idea. Because, say I want something to exist, like I want to be a millionaire, or I want to be a in-shape man. Well, I need the right knowledge to achieve that. The two are very synonymous. And that's kind of the conclusion I got to. If you want to make something real, you want to really change your reality, you need knowledge. And I guess it has to be probably like the mutually perceived thing. I'm still unsure about, but I do think if you want to make something exist, there needs to be knowledge. Yeah.
So let me try and like concretize a couple of things you've said based on my notes that I've made here, right? Language makes an attempt for us to communicate our experience to one another, right? But it never does it justice. It's never perfect. Like, by definition, you have to squeeze a concept or an experience into a word or a story. And to do that, you'll have to leave things out. right? By definition, there's limitation there. So it'll never accurately, perfectly communicate an experience to you. Does that matter, right? Does it matter, really? Because both of us, in either case, have had that experience individually and it's been meaningful to us. And we're just attempting to kind of get across an idea of what might have happened. In some cases, maybe it doesn't matter, right? If you tell me you're feeling anxious, I can't say that you don't because that's your own individual experience of it. Same thing if I said I was anxious. If we say we're both anxious, maybe our anxiety is different. To you, it manifests in the body differently, or you describe it using different words, but we're still we're still just making an attempt to explain to each other how we feel, and language is the mode with which we do that, but it's not perfect. And I think about, in Alan Watts' a bit about the unspeakable world, he talks about if I tell you to imagine a leaf, right? You'll think of probably a green spearhead shaped thing, with some like little uh, sort of little crinkles in it that create like the veins or the blood vessels or whatever for the leaf, and light shines through it and all that kind of stuff, right? We have a sort of rough collective idea of what a leaf looks like, but my leaf in my head will be different to your leaf. And by using the word leaf, we get a gist of what we're both kind of trying to describe, but it's never going to be as accurate. Um, which is true, right? And then you talked about this bit from 1984 that basically is trying to say that if you simplify language, you simplify experience. Because if you take away, let's say, the range of, I don't know, linguistic tools that I can use to describe my experience, then you can't understand me as well. We can't connect on the same level as human beings. And that's part of how the party in that book sort of controlled people by controlling the language they can use to digest digest their experience themselves and get across their experience to others and have human connection. And finally, I think what you're trying to get across with your points made at the end is that there are levels to experience. So there's first-hand experience, which is, very right hemisphere. Like I take a sip of water from my bottle here, right? I'm doing that. And then I can explain to you that my bottle exists with the water in it and I'm drinking out of it. But like you didn't have that first-hand experience. The bottle still exists, but to you it's less close, it's less primary. It's a second-hand experience. And maybe, I've never been to I don't know, I've never been to Machu Picchu, but I'd love to. It's one of the great wonders of the world. I know it exists because I know people have been there because they've used language and image to explain to me that they've been there. But it's very like, again, it's kind of further away in my field of experience. It's kind of a third-hand experience. But I know that place exists. It's less primary, it's less significant, it's less salient to me. And I guess we can choose. I want to finish with your speeding ticket example because we can choose in some cases how close in levels we want an experience to be to us. So the speeding ticket letter comes through the door. If I don't open the letter, the speeding ticket still exists. I just haven't addressed it. The same way that if there's a problem in your relationship or in your family and you sweep it under the carpet, to use a metaphor, and don't address the resentment or the issue going on, it doesn't go away. Sometimes it builds, just in the same way that a speeding ticket fine will increase if it's not addressed. Same way that in what we do here, right? You are in contact day to day with our social media, right? So you have a first-hand experience of the reviews we're getting from the podcast. I don't live in that world. Now, I know it exists because you tell me about it, but I have a second-hand experience of how our podcast is reviewed for very good reason we agree on. So there's level, like, it's like, how close do you want the thing to be to your first-hand experience? Does that make sense? And along those levels, then it becomes more significant to you, to use the term that you've been using.
Yeah, I think you're very spot on with your feedback. It genuinely makes sense in how the way that we choose to express an experience is communicates in different ways. There's a hierarchy in how real it is. Because you think about something 2D, like a bit of writing on a book is 2D, but then there's something 3D, which is a bit more real. Maybe you're looking around your room and maybe there's something 4D, which is, I don't even know. But it's kind of like a picture is worth 1,000 words. Um, and your experience right now is worth 1,000 words. There's so many different words of things in my room, but also looking at the screen, it's so many different words that I couldn't all put into one because it's a very the
Mm.
podcast isn't just two guys on the camera. It's the whole thing about me being in a very budget room on using kind of the technology that we've got, and it's with my phone's balanced on my screen on my computer in such a way that all creates the vibe of doing this, and it's very unique. That's why we can't really communicate the whole thing of what it's like.
And also, the podcast isn't just two people talking, it's me and you trying to figure out how we see the world. And we'll get it wrong sometimes. We'll make big movements forward sometimes. We'll get confused sometimes. We'll get to a point where the conversation dries up, but we'll also get to a point where it flows like one of the greatest rivers on the planet. Like it's a self-development thing. This is why it's so hard to pin things down. Because language, like there's so much complexity in the world. We kind of need language to break it down and make it understandable for ourselves and for others. But yeah, like if I say to somebody, okay, at 12:30 today, I'm going to record a podcast. They're based on their understanding and their experience of podcasts as a concept. They'll have an idea of what I'm doing, but they don't get the full gist of like how I'll feel sitting in this chair, where the conversation will go, how I'll struggle a bit through the first 5 minutes until kind of the filter starts to fall off and ideas start to flow, and they won't understand our relationship. And this is how and this conversation is just another step towards where we're trying to go as men, where we're trying to build this thing, where we're planning to take this podcast in our lives. It's things that's always so much more complex than language can get across, whether it's a leaf, whether it's a sip of orange juice, whether it's doing a podcast or who somebody is. Experience is so deep, and that's why to use the world that I'm living in at the moment, that's why the right hemisphere has to understand things in its own in the whole context. It sees that, it attends to the world as if it is that, and it really struggles to break things down.
People are like, there's too many words in the English language. It's why it makes it such a hard language. But I reckon just like keep adding, because we've got words like serendipitous and like exacerbated and
Mm.
stuff like that. But that's better than not having a word for serendipitous and not a word for exacerbated. And so we have developed this as kind of a form of our evolution, is to somehow we figured out how to describe an experience and create a word for it based off a noise. Um, and to kind of finish with your relationship example, there there's this guy. There's this influencer. He's called Jeffrey something, and he gives advice on how to speak and how to articulate, and people. He kind of explains his whole reason about why people need to learn to speak about if you're in a relationship and you're not very good at communicating, then then it's it's really hard to know how each other people feel, and it's really hard to find issues and fix them and not have things interpreted wrong. And it's also why sending text is like the lowest form of communication, because so much can be interpreted differently in ways. And then you might say, well, a phone call's a bit better, and you might say yes, but it's not as good as face to face. And there's that as well. So I think to communicate is it's an amazing skill that is really useful to everyone, not just me and you as podcasters, but to talk to people in your relationships
Mm.
and in the right way. Yeah.
Well, what do people ultimately want in all human relationships, whether that's, with your mum and dad, with your siblings, with your partner, with your best friends, with acquaintances, with strangers, with colleagues? You want to be you want to be acknowledged and really noticed and worked for and worked with. And to do that, our best tool in a lot of cases is language. To describe our experience to somebody else, or for someone to describe their experience to us, that's how we connect. Um, And that capacity is one of our superpowers as humans. It's one of the superpowers that have got us to where we are as a species. And um, it's a beautiful thing to be able to develop that skill. I mean, writing and the ability to use words and speak. And I guess actually, Jake, this perfectly linked into my last point, which I can go into in just a second. That creates how you think about the world, how you interact with the world, and that's your life fundamentally.
Mm. You might kind of, when I think about what the question of what makes life good, and the obvious ones are great experiences, and maybe you're got some nice scenery, and maybe you've got a nice house, etc. But one of the maybe underrated ones is just great conversations. How much of the best things in life is great
Mhm.
conversations, and how well it is. It's a lot. It really is, and it's maybe maybe it's why if people experience that, it change the way that they perceive, and then they may be able to achieve better experiences. So, yeah, I'll finish that there, and I'm interested in your last point.
Yeah, so it was perfect. This is dovetailed so beautifully in that my last point is about speech. Now, I've had two dreams. One that I think I talked to you about before in like personal life, and the other one was more recent, and I'm kind of linking them two together, and it built up in my thinking over the last week. So I had a dream a little while ago that you may remember me talking about, where I was in like an apartment block. It was very kind of dystopian though. It was like loads of apartment blocks stacked on top of each other. And I knew that other people lived in other blocks or other apartments in the block, sorry, but I couldn't interact with them. And I lived in this apartment on my own and I could speak anything into existence. But it was very like mundane things. So like I needed a kettle and I needed a mug and I needed some like coffee and some milk and I needed to put all that together. I needed a tap to make coffee in the morning. A very basic thing. Speak a fridge into existence. Speak some clothes into existence that you'd want. Speak any technology. I could create anything by speaking it into the world in this apartment. And as a consequence, or as a price for this ability, I had to like do work in one of the rooms in the apartment for however many hours a day. Anyway, what I realized at the end of that first dream that kind of turned everything on its head because it sounds like a positive dream at the beginning, but it kind of switched everything up was at the end, I noticed that I couldn't leave the apartment block, my apartment, sorry. I couldn't leave and go and see other people. I was stuck. And I was sort of constrained to this one space where I could speak any object, any material thing into reality right in front of me like magic. But I was sad because I couldn't connect with other people. Anyway, I kind of had part two of that dream the other day where, again, I had that same skill to speak anything into existence, right? But I only know this from vague details of the dream. It wasn't, I couldn't remember it truly clearly, but I knew that I wasn't alone. I knew that I had my friends there. I knew that I had my girlfriend there. But I still had the power of this speech. But instead, I wasn't just speaking to bring things like material things into existence. I was speaking to bring things that I collectively wanted for me and my loved ones and the community, like a home and music and food for us all to eat, and yeah, like opportunities for collective enjoyment. And this time, I was free. I wasn't constrained into this one space. And I thought the difference in this dream was very interesting. The skill is this, or the power is the same to speak anything into existence, but the way I went about it was different in terms of personal gain and material things to like collective gain and social things. And in the first, I was constrained and imprisoned. In the second, I was free. So I've been thinking about these dreams a lot. And for a couple of days, I struggled to understand what the meaning of that was because the dream was so vague. But then I just searched into Google, like, what does it mean to speak something into existence? What is there any mythological connotations to that? Is it in any great literature, whatever? And then it just slapped me in the face when the first thing that came up, obviously, was that in Genesis in the Bible, the way that God creates the world is not through physical labor, it's through speaking, right? God says, "Let there be light," and light appears. And He speaks all the the oceans and the land and the animals and the birds and the humans. He creates them through speech, through the word, right? And I'm not a Christian, but I just thought that was very interesting that there is a religious is a biblical reference to speaking things into existence. That is how true Catholics believe that, or creationists believe that that's how the world was created, through speech. And then I went on to look at some other like Bible verses that talked about, if you speak something in prayer and you truly believe it, it will happen. But then there was criticisms to that, in terms of like, if your prayers are just for your own desires and they're never going to come true, they have to be in line with God's will and God's desires. And then I tried to pick that apart a little bit and go, well, from my symbolic psychological perspective, what do I mean by God's will, or to be in line with God's will? And it comes back to many of our definitions of God that we talked about last week, being, the intention for overall good, and the the drive towards like a positive ethic, an upward aiming ethic, and a virtue, and living life for that, for those sort of positive, to create that positivity in the world. And then I kind of put this all together and went, well, if you're in line with those intentions, with God's will, in inverted commas, from like a psychological perspective, if you live a virtuous life, if you aim upward in your ethics and your philosophies, and you speak something into the world, you go, I'm going to do this, and then you believe in that, and then you take the following action, it becomes real. And I feel like that is very relevant for like the career path I want to go into my life. I know that speech and words will be my tools to carve my career and my life as a whole. And I think it's the same way for all of us. And I'll finish with this final thing before I pass on to you and we begin to close. Is my mum said to me something on the phone the other day. She said, life might be best described as a conversation between the inner and outer worlds. And having that constant dialogue with a higher being, whether that's how you view that as a god, or whether you view that as like your higher consciousness, or the self in you, or the inner world, we have to constantly be speaking to figure out and refine how we think about the world and what we should do. Now, I've talked a lot there. Tell me if you have some thoughts.
I think there is a type of category of mindset, of belief, of faith, of speaking something into existence, where some people call it visualization, some people call it manifestation, a religious person calls it prayer, an atheist calls it placebo.
Mm,
And they all mean the same thing.
mm,
They all mean something has been, something you want, something you want to happen in the future has been thought about or said, and then it goes on to happen. And there is something in this life that all these things get a little bit of truth in. This kind of mode of creation, your mind creates the matter. It 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 does. And the
mm,
other thing that came into my head was a sales context, which is very relevant to me right now. And it's like, what do you need to get a sale? And one thing is a level of pattern recognition, to say the right things, that you've spoke to enough people that this worked last time. So some empiricism, so that worked last time, so I'm going to repeat it. But you also need some control in, okay, you've said yes, you might want this. I'm going to now close you, and I'm going to take a lot of control of this conversation, and we're going to turn it into reality. And you also need things like the persuasiveness, and you need the psychology, and you need to say the right things and adapt it to the person. You need like a relationship. But to me, this kind of symbolizes, the sale can symbolize a goal. And then everything in between coming up to the sale is kind of the process of something. So maybe you want to make something into existence. You want to become this in shape, successful, rich, lavish, person, and how does how do you speak that into existence? You got the pattern recognition, you got the habits, but that all starts from the visualizations and the telling everyone in your class that one day I'm going to be a millionaire, and telling your mum that you want something more than what you've got right now, and all these things that happen at the start. So I think something happens. I think there's something in this, this 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 path to creation. There's something in this.
Mm. Well, prayer or visualization or manifestation or daydreaming, whatever like word you want to use, aren't they all ultimately a clarification of what you want in life? That then becomes an intention or a motivation that gives you agency, like that control point you made, to then take action on the thing you want. And it's through the action that the thing happens. And I think a final point that I think is important to make before we go is that if that clarification of what you want is driven by ego for like a material gain or material wealth or for your own superiority over others, that's going to lead you down a quite painful path for yourself. But if we clarify our aims towards something that is in God's will, right, in inverted commas, from a psychological perspective, i.e., that philosophy and that ethic that aims up towards the good for yourself and everybody, then you create something beautiful. That's where you do God's work in inverted commas. And yes, I'm talking very symbolically here. But that clarification of aims, and that requires thought, but it also requires language, which has been a running theme throughout this conversation. That is like the catalyst. It's like the spark at the beginning for everything to happen. In the same way that, in Genesis and creating the world, first, like the world was created through speech. Very interesting, very abstract, but yeah, I'm liking this line of thought.
The last thing I'll add is your mum's point about your inner voice and the outer world. And it makes me think about the other side of this idea, the darker side, about the time that you spend of yourself brooding on ideas and visualizations and dark thoughts, and how many hours that accumulates to people resenting on their life, and maybe hours of victim mentality and things like that, and how that then shapes your reality. So you kind of want to control your thoughts in the way that you you can control that kind of the way that you want your inner voice, your visualizations, your manifestations to be, because you can you can control what you consume, and then that controls your thoughts. So I think that that would be, yeah, the last thing.
Man, 100%. Um, I have to go now, but thank you very much for being here as always, man. Enjoyed today.
Yeah, thank you for everyone for listening. Once again, it's reconnecting me. Can you stop the recording?
Yeah, I can still hear you, but I'll stop it now.